Welcome. I'm so glad to see you all. What a great turnout. Thank you for coming out. I am delighted to have you here tonight to hear Ryan McGinness speak. I am John Ravenall, and I'm the curator of modern and contemporary art. And some of you may have heard Ryan speak here about 4 years ago when we unveiled the commissioned painting that's at the entrance to the museum. And we're delighted to welcome him back now on the occasion of the exhibition Ryan McGinness Studio Visit, which is in the 21st Century Gallery. And I hope many of you have had a chance to see the exhibition. And if you haven't, you can see it afterwards. We're open until 9 p.m. tonight. And it will actually be on view for about 7 more months. It's the installation in the 21st Century Gallery into October. So you'll have plenty of chance to see it, and I hope you'll come back again and again. Ryan, as many of you know, was born and raised in Virginia Beach, and in many ways is a product of the surf and skate culture there, which he'll actually talk some about. After that, he studied graphic design and fine art at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And then after that, he stayed in Pittsburgh, and he worked at the Andy Warhol Museum, and also worked in New York at the design firm Pentagram, which just coincidentally designed the VMFA logo, or redesigned it about 8 years ago. Since that time, in the past, say, 15, 16 years, Ryan has published 16 books, including, or starting with the breakout book in 1999, Flatness is God. And also, starting in around 2000, he started exhibiting his work in galleries. And he really became known around 2004, 2005. In 2004 was part of the group exhibition Beautiful Losers that traveled internationally, and there was actually a documentary film made about that project. And then in 2005, with an exhibition at Deitch Projects in New York, the gallery run by Jeffrey Deitch, with an exhibition called Installation View. And those really launched his career beyond where it had been already. Now, since that time, Ryan has had hundreds of solo exhibitions, including many internationally. He's exhibited in Helsinki, in Milan, in Tokyo, in Paris, in any number of places, and in Richmond, Virginia. And so we are delighted to be part of that list. Ryan is an innovative artist and thinker, and he's always pushing his work forward and always pushing that line that he so interestingly explores between fine art and design, which is really the core of his work. At the same time, he also is always exploring and addressing the relationship between corporate culture and commercial and popular culture and fine art. And he's studying corporate and commercial popular culture and appropriating from it, and also critiquing and subverting it at the same time. So always moving his practice forward. Before I bring Ryan to the stage, I just want to thank a few people, some of whom are in the audience tonight. Tony Ritzenberg supplied funds that allowed us to produce the posters that we're giving away for free in the gallery, and also the Treasure Hunt gallery guide that young people can take and find their way around the museum and follow the path that Ryan took, in a sense, looking at other works in the museum. And also Need Supply, who in a way were a kind of media partner. And of course, many of you know them as a wonderful clothing store here, with a store in Richmond, Virginia, their only store. But they also have a national and international web presence. And they have a very adventurous blog and a biannual publication called the Human Being Journal. And the blog and the journal both are really about features on all kinds of lifestyle issues as opposed to just selling merchandise. And they visited Ryan in his studio last week and produced video and interviews, and you will find those on their blog and in the journal soon. So without further ado, I'd like you to join me in welcoming back to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, Ryan McGinness.
Communication through art. The most early form of communication through art was with the cave drawings long ago. Cavemen would tell about their daily adventures by painting pictures on the walls of the caves. They were communicating with each other through pictures. As people advanced, they formed an alphabet-like system using most of the common pictures. One of the earliest people doing this were the Egyptians. They used a pictographic system which uses pictures for words. An example is a picture of the sun means the word sun. Not only did people communicate with each other back then, but they also communicated with their gods. They did this through huge temples. They communicated to their gods by worshiping the temples. In return, if they were lucky, rain would fall from the heavens. Some of the Greeks and Romans built human-sized sculptures of their gods and placed them in courtyards. Maybe the Egyptians communicated to their gods through their pyramids. As we progress, we come to a time when artists were at their high and art spread throughout Europe. Not only were there great Italian artists, but there were great Dutch and French artists as well. This time was called the Renaissance. During much of the Renaissance, artists did realistic paintings. This was called realism. Realistic paintings means the artist painted objects, mostly people, the way they really looked. He tried to make them as real as possible. Now, you may not think that this has anything to do with communication, but it does. By painting realism, the artist would communicate with the viewer through his paintings. He would try to make the viewer feel the warmth in a person's face on the canvas or make you have a good feeling. Artists didn't always communicate with words all the time, but they communicated mostly with feelings. Photography was another way of communication through art. Like paintings, pictures have a way with feelings too. The first cameras were big, and the pictures took a long time to develop. But that didn't stop people from communicating with them. Yes, people communicated with each other through pictures. A family could have their picture taken and send it to relatives. The relatives would get the message by knowing how much their friends have grown, changed, and more. Not only that, but pictures could be taken of a sunset to communicate with the viewer. The viewer is getting a message from the photographer saying, "Look how beautiful this sunset is," or of another type of landscape and a different message. Abstract art was another way to communicate. We've talked about realism, and now abstract art. Abstract art isn't anything like realism. Sometimes the viewer can't even make out what the picture is. But remember, it's the feeling you get from art as the message. So abstract art may just look like some colors splashed on canvas, and sometimes it is, but it's the feeling you get from these splashes of color. Motion picture has a lot to deal with communication, and it's still an art form. Motion picture is really its name, moving pictures. Now, the first motion picture didn't have sound like today, but they still got a message across if it were in comedy, drama, mystery, or any other kind of movie. Movies would make people cry, laugh, jump, and be very emotional, even though they didn't have sound. Even today with sound, they're even more emotional. With the invention of motion picture, what's next? Television. Yes, now people could stay at home and enjoy the theater. Now, this is still an art form, and it most certainly communicates with people. Like now, we have all news channels, sports channels, and some entertainment, but sometimes it can go a little too far, like products with commercials on TV every 5 minutes. And not only on television, but on our streets and highways with the invention of billboards. And yes, this is an art form. After all, it does take talent to design these billboards and commercials, and yes, they communicate to you. After all, would you go out to the store and buy just any soda? Of course not. You buy Pepsi because your favorite person, Michael Jackson, drinks it. So you can see it does communicate with you and tries to give you a message saying, buy this brand or buy that brand. Whichever, you get the message, all right. Now, what does all this add up to? You guessed it, a movie, but not like the motion pictures we talked about earlier, but a movie today. Take Star Wars, for example. They used all the things we've talked about, and I'll tell you how. 1, cave drawings. They drew, but not on caves. They had to do all the sketches of the weird creatures you saw in the movie. Not only creatures, but the spaceships and others as well. 2, the alphabet. You know, they had to use the alphabet when they said in a galaxy far, far away. And they also used the alphabet in the actors' scripts. Temples, 3, temples for gods. They didn't use temples in the movie, but they used something big and impressive like the pyramids, the Death Star. 4, sculptures. Creatures had to be sculpted from foam rubber. 5, realism. Had to be used to make the scenes or backgrounds look real. 6, photography. Had to be used in filming. 7, abstract art. Had to be used in the creatures' faces. Their faces had to be abstracted or made weird looking. 8, motion picture is the whole entire movie. 9, television. After some years in the theater, the movie made its way to television. 10, commercials. Had to be shown while it was showing on television and had to be used to advertise the movie. Communication through art was a paper that I wrote 30 years ago when I was 12 years old. And as you can see, at the time, it was very well received by the academic community. I share this paper with you to demonstrate the point that for quite some time I've been thinking about this idea of how art communicates and why it communicates and how art functions and its role in society. And what I want to share with you tonight is the journey that I've that culminates in the piece called Art History is Not Linear that is on exhibit here in the foyer. And share with you some of the process behind that. I also want to thank everybody at the museum, people with whom I've spoken and with people with whom I've not had a chance to speak directly. I know there are a lot of people involved in making something like this tonight happen, and also in making the exhibition upstairs happen. So thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate everything. So I grew up in Virginia Beach, and I was born in Virginia Beach, and this is the proof. I grew up in a very kind of a DIY environment, do-it-yourself. We made everything. I was involved in the Scouts, and we made all of our own toys, and we made our Halloween costumes. This is, in the top right, a picture of me with a papier-mâché dinosaur that my mother orchestrated and got all the kids in the neighborhood together to build. And this is my birth announcement on the top left that my mother made. It's a stencil and spray paint birth announcement. And this is me and my sister at the beach. And I think actually right there is my dad out in the water, and he's here tonight, I hope. Thanks for coming. So, like I mentioned, we grew up building everything and building our own toys, and here we're building a sandbox. And these are some of the things that my mother made while growing up, kind of crafts, cut out, jigsawed pieces of wood. And you can kind of see the influence that this aesthetic and these simplified shapes have on my work today. This is an elementary school kindergarten report card. The bottom states his work is very neat and he is a hard worker. And those are characteristics I still try to uphold today in my studio practice. I'm at the point in my career that I describe as emerging mid-career. And so that means that this is early work. This is a very surreal drawing. And this is a conceptual drawing. I was in Virginia Beach kindergarten through 12th grade. Went through the public school system there and also attended a school called Old Donation Center for the Gifted and Talented, where I first learned to take the study and pursuit of art very seriously. And it was a very difficult, very hardcore program. This is one of our tests I was taking in elementary school about Marc Chagall. And this is an early etching. What I learned from Marc Chagall is that he shows most daily objects in his life are painted, and that's the case with this etching. Most objects from my daily life are painted. Not that a flaming skull was in my life, but pictures of flaming skulls were, and I'll show you some of those later in skateboard graphics and such. I grew up sailing and playing soccer, and I actually played soccer for my city, for Virginia Beach, which meant that most weekends were spent traveling up and on the East Coast playing other teams in the same kind of select league. And one thing that has always kind of stuck with me is the exchange of patches that would happen at the end of the game. At the end of every match, each of the players would trade patches, and you would get these patches from cities all over the state, all over, like I said, the East Coast. And these weren't functional patches. They weren't used to mend clothes, but they were symbolic gestures that were based in aesthetics, and they communicated with very simple pictures in very simple small picture planes, and it was a way to use these kind of these pictures basically, and that's how they function really, as only pictures, as currency. And also as an expression of who you are and where you're from. These are, I grew up, as I said, kind of in this skate and surf culture, and so from an early age, began to understand the power that these brands had in differentiating their products from other or otherwise ordinary products. What made one shirt different from another wasn't necessarily the quality of the material or the craftsmanship, with a lot of surf shop shirts, but it was the brand and it was the imagery. And so this is something I was very curious about, and it didn't self-consciously explored, but at the very least I knew that I wanted to kind of assume that power for myself. And so I had my sights on creating my own brand, and my middle name is Joseph, so RJM Surf Designs was an idea I had for my own brand. And again, I was very curious about this idea of how the transformative power of logos, basically, and of brands on otherwise ordinary objects. This is a skateboard ramp. I hope Dr. and Mrs. Bulkey are here. Thank you for allowing us to build the ramp in your yard. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. walking into a skateboard shop and looking at what are essentially oil on wood panels is no different an aesthetic experience than going into a gallery or a museum. The value judgments that you pass on the objects that you're looking at are based in the aesthetics. And growing up and looking at skateboard decks, that means, well, what is cool? And you're deciding on what is cool based on how it looks. And that's certainly no different than, again, the same kind of experience in evaluating art. We're talking about same thing, oil on wood panels. And so I was very interested in this idea of what makes something cool and why. And I tell you, nothing is cooler than the computer club. This is a spread from my junior high yearbook. I was in the computer club and the art club. And I feel like my studio practice and career still reflects this dichotomy. I'm still in the computer club. I'm still in the art club. And curiously, at the time, I had outlined myself in a red marker, as if to signal to my future self what I looked like and who I was. I was fortunate enough to have an after-school job while I was in high school, where I worked on one of the Navy bases, and I made signs and menus and notifications, and was able to really get my hands dirty with Croy lettering machines and photocopiers and typewriters. And it was a real treat for me because that's what I loved doing. I loved combining type and image. And I would use those skills in everything I made, from school campaign flyers. I was the school vice president and class president. I was involved in debate and honor society and all those things. It's very kind of academically minded and very involved. Very involved in school, and then out of school, I was very interested in art and art history, not only with these after-school programs, at Old Donation, but also in kind of self-guided pursuits. I was very interested, in particular, in the Dada movement, and in fact, my friend Tim, who's here tonight, and I were, I think, the only two people who checked out from the library the one book from Great Neck Public Library, the one book about Dada. And at the time, I just felt like I was the only person, or we were the only people who knew about this art movement. And I remember going and applying to schools and taking my portfolio and having these portfolio reviews and meeting with these professors and asking, have you heard about this Dada movement? And I assumed they hadn't, because we were the only ones who had checked out the book. So Dada was a very big influence on the spirit of Dada, the anti-authoritarian spirit of Dada, the anti-art movement, and how the movement kind of came to terms with that dichotomy. It's all very, very interesting to us, and certainly aesthetically influenced the things that Tim and I were making at the time. We had a band called Green Suede Filth, and it was an exercise that was somewhere between a real band and a prank band. We would make flyers, and we would make cassette covers, and we made real recordings. But I had no musical skill or talent. My real interest was in making these flyers and in making the shirts and in making the fake performance posters. And that's what I enjoyed doing. Same with skateboarding. I had no real skateboarding skill. I couldn't really skateboard very well, but what I enjoyed was painting the skateboard decks and making the T-shirts and making stickers and building ramps and painting ramps and it's these pursuits that I started to recognize what my core true interests were. And these are early photocopy experiments. And this was a solo exhibition at Cox High School. So even for school reports and book reports, I would be so interested in creating the visuals and the covers for the reports and the posters, maybe more so than actually doing the research, which was, that part was kind of easy for me, and I wasn't terribly stimulated by that as much as I was by making the visuals and communicating visually. And I didn't really know that was something that one could do. And furthermore, I had no idea that there was a kind of a proper art world out there. I'm sure it's different now, but 30 years ago, Virginia Beach wasn't exactly a hotbed of art, activity. And so, the only notion of an art world I had was maybe through Interview magazine, and even then, it didn't seem like a very, very serious or a very academic field. But then I discovered this magazine called Emigre. And Emigre was an oversized, large format design journal published out of California and started by two Dutch expats. And this design journal blew my mind. They were showcasing the same kind of work and the same kind of things that I was doing and I was interested in. And there seemed to be a real dialogue and discipline to what they were doing. There were essays about the design field. And so it kind of clicked. There's a name for what I want to do, and there's an industry, and there's a community, and that's what I went off to study at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And so I went off and studied graphic design while still also studying painting and fine art. But it's the design. In fact, I was actually the last year at Carnegie Mellon that had art and design combined. So after the first year, then you chose whichever path you would go in. And up to that point, I had noticed kind of noticed that there was a kind of a place for art that wasn't very highly regarded among peers. It was the class that it wasn't taken seriously. It was maybe an elective that you would, an easy elective where you could get an easy A. And it was only through this separate school that I went to, Old Donation, where it was taken very seriously. But then again, when I was at university that first year, I noticed the people who were very serious and wanted to study and understand how picture planes are constructed and wanted to learn real information were the people who studied design, and the people who wanted to take it easy were the people who studied art. So that's just how it was. And so I studied design because I was fascinated about how, these are the kind of simple studies that we did these first couple of years, just simple line studies about how to build tension and how to progressively build a picture plane, how to create a system and figure out all the different options within that system in order to create different compositions. And this is what I really loved, and still love. These are the kind of exercises in a very kind of Mr. Miyagi way that you do, for months and for years, and you don't really understand how they're very useful until you're thrown into the ring, and then you have to Karate. Is anyone with me? Karate Kid? And then all of a sudden, these exercises become just muscle memory, and then you get very good at what you're doing. So anyway, this is a school assignment. A logo for a music festival in a park. I think it was after my first year in college, I went back to Virginia Beach, and I was so excited that I had kind of found this discipline to pursue, and I was so energized and stimulated. I started my first design company in Virginia Beach. It was called Kishku Design Company. She sounds the way bananas taste is a Truman Capote inappropriation. So I had this design company which I felt like I needed in order to do design, whatever that meant. And for me at the time, it meant creating album covers for my friends' bands, creating cassette covers, creating posters, giving form to prescribed content. And so these are examples of cassette cover I did for my friend Tim's band called Schwa. And this is me and Tim when I came to Richmond one time to host and organize an Atari tournament. This slide is really designed to embarrass Tim. Because I'm not embarrassed by this at all. Yeah. So I had a real connection to Richmond at the time. And this must have been, by now we're talking 93, 94, and I moved to New York in 1994. And these are the paintings that I was making at that time. Very simple clip art images. I was interested in a few things. One, the idea of painting drawings. And then the other more conceptual idea of taking images from the public domain that aren't owned by anybody, aren't attributed to anybody, they have no authorship, and owning them for myself and seeing what happens when you actually paint them. And I was also very caught up with all the silly things you learn in school about simulation, Baudrillard, and what it means to look at. This is actually painted on the back of the translucent plastic, and then the image casts a shadow onto the wall, and which is the real or hyper-real image. And so I wanted to see what happened when I did these kinds of things, and as it turns out, nothing happens. So it wasn't. So I was in New York '94 and pursuing painting and being in small group shows and doing as much design work as I could at the time. I worked at a design firm called Pentagram for 6 months, and then did a lot of freelance work on my own, and just to stay alive and just to work and make money. And it wasn't really until 99 or 2000 where those two worlds kind of merged for me. And I feel like I really found a true and honest voice that I could express in my paintings. And that voice sounded a lot like what I had learned in my design education. And this is a 360-panel mural made up of 360 little canvas boards. And this was like 1999, maybe 2000. So what I've always done is not only taken this aesthetic that has historically resided in the world or industry of design and applied it to my artwork, but also taken the process of creating or what would traditionally be known as a design process, and so what that means for making my drawings is starting with sketches and developing those sketches over and over until I get a final drawing, and that final drawing is one of the what I call elements or core ingredients that I use in all of my work. And so by going through this process, I'm not the kind of artist who can just sit down and make a beautiful drawing. I go through a process of continually failing and revising and making better until I come up with a solution or multiple solutions. And so these slides obviously show you some of what that process looks like. When I'm drawing, I'm trying to find the underlying geometry inherent in the forms. And to me, that is a search for the truth. And so I find a lot of personal truth and kind of satisfaction in perfecting these forms. I feel like that when I've come up with a final solution, that there is no other solution, and that I've found a kind of truth. And I think that's the primary goal or search for a lot of artists in their work. And the source of the imagery, there's a whole range. They're from, this is Romulus and Remus abstracted, but they come from dreams or pop songs or just about any small or large idea that I can communicate and express very efficiently. I'm going to show you a whole range of works from the past 10 to 15 years, and they're not necessarily in chronological order, but I just want to give you kind of an overview and background of what I'm doing. These are porcelain baked enamel on steel panels. They're about 200 pounds each, and these are examples of very simplified picture planes. I go back and forth between the more kind of layered and complicated and the more simple. This is from an exhibition titled Worlds Within Worlds, where I built a maze lined with mirrors and put my drawings on the surfaces of the mirrors in an attempt to surround the viewer in a world, an ever replicating world of drawings, because the drawings in the end exist as digital information, and they can be replicated forever. I'm sorry, this is a painting 6 foot square. This is a detail of that painting. I make a whole broad range of things, from paintings to skateboards, soccer balls, and T-shirts, and sculptures and installations. These are painted and laser-cut skateboards that are bolted in the middle and cantilever off the wall. This is a painted and vinyl installation. I try to create extreme scale shifts within the work in an attempt to reflect the true nature of the universe, and that there are many universes at all these different scales. This is from a body of work based on the figure. This is from the Women series. Welded aluminum sculpture on the left and a 6 foot square painting on the right. This is a painting on the wall with a painting that hangs in front of the painting on the wall. Same idea here with this installation, paint on the wall with vinyl. This is actually a kind of a donut-shaped painting with painting and vinyl in the center. This is 8 feet by 12 feet. I go back and forth between more legible paintings and kind of more layered and complicated compositions. This is I finished this painting last year. It's a recent painting, and then this is a detail. This is an acrylic sculpture. It's acrylic paint on acrylic. This is another acrylic sculpture, 6 feet wide. These are paintings from a series I call Black Holes. They are painted in fluorescent paint, and they glow under black light. And there's fluorescent vinyl on the wall. I'm very interested in using fluorescence and pearlescence and metallic paints, and paints with an inherent material quality that must be experienced in person, and that force a very specific space-time experience. As good as a photograph can represent what's going on in this installation, you really need to be there in person to experience the work. And I think that's increasingly more important as we experience art mostly through reproduction, and furthermore mostly through JPEGs and on the screen. This is a 6 foot square piece made up of 777 different buttons. This is an installation at Art Basel, Miami Beach, a few years ago. Obviously, the theme is based on skateboarding, and furthermore, takes a lot of inspiration from the Bones Brigade. And there was a ramp in the background. These are shipping containers with 4-foot by 8-foot panels attached to the sides. Another installation. This is from the Beautiful Losers exhibition 6 or 7, maybe 8 years ago now. This is a more recent painting I finished end of last year. Another recent painting. The paintings are all built with layers and layers of silk-screened elements, those kind of simplified drawings that I showed you earlier. The paintings aren't planned out. I've tried as best I can to actually plan the paintings with as much consideration as I actually make the individual drawings, but it doesn't work well for me, and it's hard for me to do that because I also believe that the process of making a painting should inform what the painting is, and that's true of any medium. The process should inform what the thing is, and so as a result, the paintings are built very intuitively, and I make a mark, respond to that mark, make another mark. This is another installation and another example of extreme scale shifts. This is welded aluminum sculpture. These are acrylic sculptures. This is an installation at Deitch Projects in New York. This is a color spectrum Roy G. Biv painting, and here are some details. These are signs that I made that are in a business park in Brooklyn. The idea is that I matched the actual paint color and material of the existing lampposts and created a series of signs that hopefully were a little more subversive, and you might tend to walk by and do a double take and then realize what they were. This is that installation view exhibition that was at Deitch Projects that John mentioned earlier. These are fiberglass lollipops, basically. They're two-sided paintings that cantilever off the wall. This is a mirror-polished stainless steel sculpture. It's about 4 feet high. I make a few different bodies of work. In general, the paintings that are kind of in general, I call them mindscapes. That's the largest body of work. And then I also make these, what you've seen, the black holes. I also make this series based on figures, the women's series. And I've also been working on a series called Art History is Not Linear. And these started to develop actually before the project with the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and these are just a few examples of those drawings that I made based on existing artworks. This is my favorite sculpture. It's a Dada piece by Tristan Tzara. The idea with the Virginia Museum project, Art History is Not Linear, was for me to look at their permanent collection, and I selected 200 objects in their collection and made a series of 200 drawings based on those objects, and then used those 200 drawings to collage together in a series of paintings. And this idea of art history is not linear is really based on this idea that it's often taught to us that there's a very linear progression in art history, but it's really not the case. Influences skip generations, and of course we're bound by time, and we, by default things are taught in a very linear progression, but it's not as linear as we're led to believe. So now I'd like to share with you some of that process behind making these works specifically. The sketches that lead up to the final drawing are all done with ink on paper. And again, as I mentioned before, the final drawing exists as a digital file, basically, and furthermore, as what is known as a vector file, as opposed to a bitmap file. A bitmap file is the kind of file that you would take with your digital camera. And the important thing to note about the difference between the two is that bitmap images are resolution dependent. The resolution of the image is only as good as the initial, the tool with which you made the picture. Vector files, on the other hand, are defined by a series of equations. And of course, as you know, with equations, they're variable. And so these vector files can be scaled infinitely up and down and can be replicated forever. And by having a core base of ingredients that are vector files, I'm able to materialize these drawings in a whole variety of medium. From I can make film to make the screens to make the paintings, or I can make shirts or skateboards without losing any image integrity. It also means that there is no one original to any of these drawings. There's simply information that's, again, materialized and replicated forever. Each new materialization of a drawing is not a reproduction of an original because no original exists. Once I was finished making all 200 of these drawings, I then could scale them up and down and make film from which I made the screens. And once I had these screens, then I could start to build the paintings. And this is what that process looks like. I build my paintings horizontally. I paint horizontally, and that's because I'm screening images. And it has to be done horizontally. So I'll tend to lay out a number of paintings and work on them in parallel at the same time. So I'll start, again, just by throwing down a few images and then building up the painting very intuitively and responding to what I've done before. And this is the final painting in this one example. This is one of the 16 paintings, and these are the other paintings. So again, the idea is that I've collaged together these 200 different elements to make the paintings. And you could actually reverse engineer or unpack the painting and see all the source images and see where the initial inspiration came for each separate element. And these are all 16 paintings as they're installed in the foyer here. The end. So I think the plan now is to entertain any questions, and feel free to ask anything. I can go back. I know I went through the slides very quickly. There are 200 slides here. I can easily go back to any of them to talk about any of them. And does anybody have any questions? And we have microphones. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. The question is about color, and can I talk about color in my work and maybe some of the artists who have influenced me? No. I use color very intuitively, which is to say that I was never very good at color theory or color matching, but it's a very intuitive expression. But I can tell you that I steered clear of fluorescence for a long time because I am so concerned and obsessive about the quality of paints and how archival things are and how color-fast materials are, because I want my work to last forever. And so it was only after looking at some early Keith Haring paintings and some early Peter Halley paintings that were in fluorescent and seeing how those held up that I felt more comfortable. And then furthermore, I did a lot of research and investigated with a lot of paint companies, namely Golden. They're a brand of paint that I use a lot, and calling their technical helpline and getting samples and really understanding just how far fluorescent paints have come even the past 5-6 years. So then I felt really more comfortable using fluorescence in particular. But as far as just in general using color, I don't have a very satisfying answer for that other than it's just very intuitive, and I'll make work that's very colorful like this, or I'll make I made a series of paintings based on black on black, tone on tone. I'll make more monochromatic paintings and keep the palette very limited. But it's not a very calculated approach to color.
I noticed that you could buy one of your T-shirts on the Alien Workshop website. How do you feel about kids riding around and skateboarding with pieces of artwork on their chest?
Oh, well, I don't even consider T-shirts or any products, for that matter, to be art. Those things don't really fall under my definition of art. One of the qualifiers of art for me is that art has no real use. There's no utility attached to art. And it's not to say that I don't value those things, but I don't consider those things art. I'm sorry, I can't hear.
I mean, you set up the design for the shirt, so that is art, right?
Yeah, all of the art making decisions are in that design process. And so the making of the shirt, I wasn't actually involved in. That's a very good example of me directing the production of something. And that's goes back to like another tenet of art. I feel like the artist should be involved in the process of making the work. So there are some pieces that I simply direct, and some pieces that I make that have utility attached to them. And there are some things I make that are somewhere in between, like sculptures, for example. These big metal sculptures I don't make in the studio, but I work with fabricators. But I'll work as closely as I can and in person. So those pieces are somewhere in between.
Have you ever thought of making something that's totally out of words? Like, I was thinking of the Meras with the labyrinth and having all these words going everywhere.
Yeah, I steered clear of using language, at least text, type, in my work for years because I felt that it was too English-centric. And my hope is always to make work that speaks and uses a universal language. And so I got really hung up on this idea of text-based work being very selfish and kind of English-centric. But now I've gotten over that for some reason. And I'm starting to, for instance, I have an Instagram account that is all text-based, and it's building toward a text-based work. And I study typography. I have a love of typography, so much so that for a while it kind of interfered with my daily experiences. If you're really into type, then you see type before words, and that's just how much So I love typography. I love working, and not only the form of words, but the words themselves. So I'm using words more and more, and becoming more comfortable with the idea, kind of allowing myself to use words. I think most artists set up rules for themselves, and I think you have to set up rules and parameters. And in doing so, here are the type words, some type-based buttons. So in doing so, it helps you kind of find your way, and then you learn when and why to break those rules. So using type is one of those rules I've had hang-ups about.
Thank you. At the Standard Hotel in New York City, your artwork certainly had utility and guidance and direction. So speak to us about that relationship. Yeah, I have a very positive and healthy relationship with the Standard Hotel. Standard Hotel is they have a few. I think there are two in New York. There are two in L.A. Maybe a few more. Let's see, maybe it was 2001 or so. I designed a system of images for the Standard to use in the hotel that included, there were silly takes on what would otherwise be considered more pedestrian kind of directives, like the little icons on the phone. It was kind of a take on that. And the trash cans are lined with drawings of someone vomiting into the trash can. And there's a silly drawing for toilet paper. So you're absolutely right. That's a case where the artwork has utility attached to it in most cases. And I wouldn't necessarily consider those artworks, although they're very artfully addressed. They've also acquired a lot of porcelain-baked enamel panels that they've hung and they have installed in the hotel as well. So there's a difference between there's a conceptual difference between those kinds of works. Yeah.
You mentioned your Snapchat account, and I'm curious to know, in this day and age, are you thinking at all in terms of logos and icons as portals, the way we're using them now, where we poke them and they open up a website or another experience at all?
No.
And it's incidentally, it's an Instagram account, which I guess is more picture based. For months when after Instagram came out, people were telling me about it and saying, "Oh, you should get on Instagram." And I spent a long time trying to figure out what I wanted to do with that. It's a publishing tool, basically, and it's an opportunity for people to publish and share whatever they want. And I finally came up with a solution, which, as it turns out, is completely wrong and antithetical to their intention. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to do it. I wanted to make work that was specific to that medium. And as a result, I don't think it's really found an audience yet. But that was my intention.
Would you say that you have a specific creative pursuit that you take as a form of like play and experimentation, or do you use things like Instagram as a way to let loose and explore certain parameters, and all your work feeds into each other?
Yeah, there's no easy or simple way to break down the process, and so Instagram is a good example of me doing something new that I haven't done before, but a way for me to share that process and experiment publicly, I guess. And I have a Tumblr account also, which shows studio and sketchbook scenes. And that's another opportunity to share kind of behind the scenes and also share the process. One more? We have one more question.
Hi. You briefly talked about how Dada influenced a lot of your work, and I was wondering if you could touch on if there was any other sects of modernism that influenced any of your work.
I have a very satisfying answer to that question, if I can find it. There's a lecture I gave rather recently about this women body of work, but at the beginning of the lecture I'll show you really quickly many slides that show other influences. I'll go through these really quickly. Well, for one thing, I'm very interested in sign symbol systems. This one, for example, was designed by the United States Department of Transportation. And incidentally, or maybe not so incidentally, some of my professors were on the committee who created this sign system. Hans Schmidt, Eastern European artist, there's this whole group of these artists I've become very, very interested in recently. I feel like they're my long-lost brother's family. And there's another example of how art history is not linear. I feel like there's this group of artists, many of whom are here, who were pursuing this aesthetic of very simplified forms. Their work was, as a result of being so effective at communicating visually, was co-opted by the state and by industry. And their careers spun off into and became kind of commercialized. There was utility attached to a lot of their work. An example of Gerhard Arndt's, he was commissioned to design this whole system of signs that served a purpose. And so I feel like that aesthetic pursuit, which was very much a part of art history, spun off at the very same time that the design industry was starting to take off. And so those are the artists that I'm interested in. And these are more examples of sign symbols systems. Anyway, so I just showed you a few examples to answer your question. Hope that worked. Yeah. Okay. We're good? Okay, we're good. Thanks.
I want to thank you all for coming. You've been a great audience, and thank Ryan for his generosity in talking about his sources of inspiration and his creative process. A few things before we have a chance for a signing. People have asked about the exhibition out in the Hall of Student Work, and that's the Scholastic exhibition. And I want you to know now that if you're interested in having Ryan sign posters, books, skateboards, he will be directly across the lobby, and I'm assuming that we'll have a fairly large turnout for that, so we're going to ask that you not ask him for inscriptions. He will just be signing, and also 3 things total, maximum total. And that will allow everybody to have an opportunity and Ryan not to be here all night. So thank you for coming, and thank you very much to Ryan McGinness.